Ross McGowan. Ross is a well-known advocate of for the ABC and the convener of the ABC Friends Central Coast branch. He is a committee member of the ABC Friends New South Wales and ACT. Today, Ross will showcase his lecture he presented to the Sydney Youth 3A about why we need to protect our ABC. I'm sure his presentation will assist us in spreading the message to protect our ABC within community groups across northern Sydney. Please give a warm welcome to Ross.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Beverly, and thank you, John, and welcome everybody. Now, my talk is really adapted from a U3A talk I gave on the Central Coast. So it wasn't actually in Sydney. They've got a very well-organised U3A organisation branch up on the Central Coast. And I think I was stepping into some very big shoes because prior to my presenting the lecture, Ed Davis had presented a lecture on U3A, through the U3A, and they were pretty big shoes to fill, and I was a bit daunted. But Ed gave me some assistance, so my talk was on the ABC and its role in Australian democracy. So I've kind of adapted it to include some of the strategies we're trying to employ on the Central Coast and strategies that I've been, I suppose, tasked by Tess and the New South Wales Committee to see if we can implement effectively. Now, because I've got to speak to move over to the slides there, and they're not in order, Peter, so I might put the microphone down. I'll see how I go without the microphone, but if I'm incomprehensible, please let me know. Now, about 30 years ago, I was doing a postgraduate course, a degree. Can you hear me without it? Or? Yes. Okay, I'll keep going. If you can't hear me, let me know and I'll pick it up again. And I had a particularly...
What subject?
Well, it was a master's degree in education, but it was based on arts education. So I had a rather tough assessor, which is no bad thing, and I did pretty well, quite well in all the courses except this one, where I just achieved a pass. I found her pretty tough, and other people did as well. But she did give us some very good advice, which was because we had to do a spoken presentation as part of the assessment. And she said, look, if you're developing a theme, it's best to start with an anecdote. So I'm going to give you an anecdote, and I'll just move the slide over. And the anecdote is, about a decade ago, I was going to meet some people for coffee. And I decided to give what's now known as ABC Classic a try. I think in those days it was Classic FM or had a different title. And for the first time, and this shows how ignorant I was about classical music, they were running through the Classic Top 100. And does anyone know what number 3 was?
When? 10 years ago.
10 years, well, it's still talked about now. Anyway, it was the Lark Ascending. Are you familiar with the Lark Ascending? Mm-hmm. Yes. And that, again, it's a very well-known piece. So again, I'm quite ignorant about classical music, but I heard it for the first time, and I'm driving the car, and it brought me to tears. I thought it was such a sublime, wonderful, lyrical piece, beautiful romantic piece of music that I was profoundly moved by, and I'm sure you are too. It's wonderful. And then I got to thinking afterwards how little I know about classical music, and this was a sort of a catalyst to find out a little bit more, and I wondered how the composer had managed to achieve the wonderful result that he had, what techniques he used. You know, I understood that it was composed for violin, but I didn't know much about the qualities of the sound that a violin could produce. I didn't know much about the context of the piece. And the context is that Ralph Vaughan Williams, the composer, wrote the piece during the outbreak or just at the outbreak of the First World War, and he desperately wanted to remind listeners and his audience that there was still beauty in the world. And he consequently served and, thank goodness, survived the First World War. And he was inspired by a poem by George Meredith. I think it's the Ode to the Skylark.
Oh, yeah.
And Siegfried Sassoon had written about the poem that the poem soared.
Sure.
And Ray Vaughan Williams, I think, achieved exactly the same effect with his composition. The music just soars. And I was reminded by Ed Ayres, who's a wonderful broadcaster on Classic FM and a wonderful violinist, that a collective noun for skylarks is an exaltation. And that's really what the piece is. It's a wonderful exaltation. So in that process, I've been educated, I've been inspired, and I've been inspired to find out more, to develop myself, develop my mind through something that was broadcast on the ABC. And a lot of those comments and answers that I was searching for were found by searching through the ABC and listening to the broadcasters on Classic FM. So I thought that really encapsulates what the ABC does and why we are advocates for the ABC. Because the ABC seeks to inform and educate and inspire us, and in doing so, it enhances our lives. And that's really, I think, why I'm an advocate for the ABC. That's the purpose of the ABC. Now, when Ed Davis came to the Central Coast, when he was president, he paid us a visit, and he distinguished between the different forms of broadcasting and the roles of the different forms of broadcasting. So this was presented in my U3A talk. Excuse me, Peter. So really we can talk about three different types of broadcasting. Public, and this is a very important distinction, state, because we might confuse public and state, but they're entirely different things, and commercial. And they're obviously financed and presented in different ways and managed and controlled in different ways. So public media can be defined as any media that's owned and accountable to the public. That's the UNESCO definition. Made, financed and controlled by the public for the public. And its purpose is to inform, educate and entertain. As opposed to state media, which is controlled by the government. And therefore may be well resourced, but obviously reflects the ruling party that's in power at the time. And, you know, it doesn't need to be said that you can't rely on what Mr. Putin says through state media. But that's entirely different to public media, and of course we know that the ABC and the BBC are governed by a charter which is independent of government. Sorry, you need me to use the microphone?
No.
No, you're right? Okay. Okay, and that's a very important distinction. So we're talking about something which is independent to government, and we know from time to time thoroughly annoys government of both stripes on numerous occasions. And we had a crisis in the ABC where the chairman had to leave because he was compromised. He wanted to certain journalists to stop reporting in the way they were because it was going to offend the government and it was going to affect some funding that he wanted for, I think, additional investment from the government. And once that became public from the manager, he had to go because he was compromised and he compromised the ABC's independence. So that's very important.
Was that Andrew
Yeah, sorry.
Coburn? Was that Andrew Coburn?
No, I'm going back to the chairman, and I'm trying to recall his name. It was during the Turnbull government. I've lost him, but yeah. So that was the issue. Commercial media is funded through advertising and private investment. Now we go back to the start of broadcasting, and primarily things are broadcast or you receive the news through newspapers. And we have newspaper moguls, Hearst, Lord Northcliffe in England, and those newspapers very much tended to reflect, or may reflect, the opinions of the owner. The owner can step in any time and say to the journalist, squash this story, run this story. We've got an example now with Kerry Stokes and Ben Roberts-Smith and his attitude towards the journalists who are running stories investigating that story. Okay, so still happening. The founding chair of the BBC, Lord Reith, deemed it necessary for the BBC to lead rather than follow public taste. And of course, with the commercial media, there is a tendency to follow the public taste because they have to attract advertising revenue. They will run programs which they feel will rate and are popular. So they're a little bit risk averse. If you wanted to look at a particular topic, let's go back to Ray Vaughan Williams and the Lark Ascending, you could find it on, say, a community radio station, but that doesn't have the reach the ABC does, and I don't think their broadcasters have the level of expertise and knowledge and awareness that ABC broadcasters have. So very much, if we're interested in particular fields, particular aspects of academic study, or particular aspects of culture or science, we're more likely to find it on a public broadcaster that will take a risk, that's not dependent on advertisers. And of course, advertisers themselves can influence what's broadcast. They want to place their ads during a particular time when they think most people are watching, and they want to know that the program's going to have a lot of people tuned in. So they can exert influence on commercial media as well, in the way they can't in public broadcasting. Although there's an exception, of course, with SBS, because we know now that does use advertising. So the ABC's got a charter. And I'm not going to run through the whole charter, but that very much reflects Lord Reith's intentions for the BBC and the rationale for the ABC. Broadcasting programs that contribute to a sense of national identity and inform and entertain and reflect cultural diversity. We'll talk a little bit more about cultural diversity on the Central Coast and how we're going to see if we can encourage people to come along to one of our functions from diverse cultural backgrounds. Broadcasting programs of an educational nature, transmitting to countries outside Australia. Our next function is going to be featuring Helen Grasswell, who'll be talking about ABC International, very important part of the ABC, and encouraging an awareness of Australia and an international understanding of Australian attitudes. And again, that comes back to ABC International that Helen's going to be talking about. Okay, so could we find those things on commercial media? Yes, possibly, but not to the same extent. So if we think about ABC International, which used to be the Australia network, again, Kerry Stokes had taken it over. I think he was awarded a contract by the government, and he became rather disinterested in it because he wasn't feeling that he was gaining enough revenue from it. So it didn't have the commercial value to him. So again, those sorts of roles we really need a public media organisation to fulfil. If we leave it to commercial media, it won't happen, or won't happen nearly to the same extent. Does anyone want to add anything to that? Please feel free to interrupt at any stage. I don't want to present death by PowerPoint to you.
Could I ask you to stand there or there so that over here we can see?
Oh, I'm sorry, I apologise. Okay, so I'll just duck over to the next slide and then I'll duck back again. Now, why are we here? I've spent a considerable amount of time trying to get my head around an online booking system for our next event. you've spent considerable amounts of time campaigning, you've given up your time, we're all volunteers, time away from family, time away from friends, time away from other things we'd like to do, even though we're all lovely people and it's great to socialise and it's an opportunity to do that, but why are we volunteering our time for the ABC? Because of the things, hopefully, that I've just discussed about. That it's an institution that will educate us, that will enhance our lives, that will inform us. And it needs protecting. So then the next issue is, because from time to time, it's raised the ire of governments, again, of both persuasions. So it was felt we needed a group of volunteers to advocate for the ABC. So we're all advocates and we're all activists. And activist implies being active. So we've got to get out there and we've got to lobby and we've got to reach out to the public in our communities and we've got to get organised. So in around about 2017 it was decided that we were going to create a national body for Friends of the ABC. Prior to that we had the state body in New South Wales and we had the state body in Victoria who tended to be separate entities, and I've just been in a Zoom discussion with convened by Bruce Stevenson on the Northern Tablelands, and he made the comment he felt that pretty much in those days branches were separate entities. We had some direction from the state body, we had state conferences, we didn't have a national organisation, and we would get funding from the state organisation and support when we needed it. But he felt, and I agree with him in part only, that a lot of the branches ran as separate entities. So to assist us, we've developed a national body, and I've got a diagram here. And there's a lot of crossover, and I've racked my brain and I've tried to think of, all right, what are the responsibilities of each particular tier of the organisation for us to become successful advocates? So in the national body, we've got Cassandra Parkinson, who's our national president, along with Michael Henry, who's her vice president, making representations to Parliament, federal Parliament. And we've also got the ABC alumni who'll be going along as well. We've got a national campaign strategy. We've got a national database so we can keep track of our members and communicate what we're doing. And we've got a website and a Facebook page. The national body can send out, and the state body can send out mass emails. So there's obviously a bit of crossover there between the national organisation, and the state organisation with strategic plans, offering support. Our support as branches is going to come primarily from the state committee, more so than the national committee. And there's communications, again, in the state branch, and our state news is incorporated within the national website and the Facebook page. And we're organising events on a state level and communicating those back to the national level. So that's the arrow. So by no means is it a top-down model. We see a flow going each way. And then, of course, in New South Wales, which was a little bit different to Victoria. Victoria was much more, as I understand it, much more centralised, but in New South Wales we have branches across the state. And we're in the process of establishing new ones. We've got fledgling branches, as well as older ones such as the Central Coast and the eastern suburbs that have been around for quite a while. And of course, at the branch level, we're involved in local campaigning. We're getting into our local communities and we're trying to communicate our concerns about the ABC, or we're trying to convince people about the value of the ABC at a local level. And I must say, I wondered when I looked at your agenda, which is very comprehensive and very packed, I wondered why you need me here at all to tell you about how to advocate, because you seem to be doing a wonderful job. And so perhaps we should exchange positions. I should be listening to you, I think. And at the branch level, we're trying to keep tabs of our local membership and reach out to our local members and communicate. And of course, we're trying to convince other people to join in our local communities. So we use local media. Now, we're fortunate on the Central Coast in the sense that we've got a local ABC radio station. Now, they've got limited broadcast. They only broadcast up until midday, and then the signals transferred comes from Sydney, from what used to be 702, Sydney radio. But we try and utilise them as much as possible when we've got a guest speaker and ask them to do an interview. And I'm trying to, in the future, see if I can engage them a little bit more in what we're doing. So that's an advantage for our branch. We've got ABC Local. And of course we've got local media. We've got community news that we try and utilise, local newspapers, local community radio stations that we try and get our message across through. So I also think now we're starting to communicate, and this is a good example of it, we're starting to communicate more as branches. And one of the things that we're trying to develop, which I'll explain a little bit more in a bit more detail, is we're trying to utilise technologies such as Zoom so that we can have branch meetings across branches and exchange ideas and talk about our challenges and do a bit of problem solving, if you like, and talk about how we're going to support one another, particularly those branches that are just being established, such as down the south coast of Western Sydney, where they're still trying to attract a membership. Okay, so that's our structure. Any questions or issues about that? All right. So it's not a case of one. So, I'm sorry.
What's the total membership right now?
I can't answer that. I didn't hear that there were 55,000. I think supporters. Tess?
67,000 members and supporters, and of that membership, I think it's about 3,500 in New South Wales and ACT. So 67,000 supporters is a huge
That's a lot.
community,
That's
and that's,
tremendous.
yes, I think that's national.
Right. On the Central Coast, we have 330 people on my membership. I should say my membership list. On our membership list, but there's a bit of a problem with activism, and the responsibilities for getting events underway tend to be confined to a small group. We're trying to do what we can to get people transitioning into the executive to take on more responsibilities. But I'll talk about that. I'll talk about that a little bit later. That's our particular challenge on the Central Coast.
Ross, could I just, or you mention that from that very first branch in 1976,
Yes.
there are now about 40 branches of Friends around the country.
Wonderful.
And just explain that Corin, husband Walter, started the ABC Friends in 1976, the first branch.
So we're all indebted to you and Walter, because what a great legacy. And here we are today.
We would be nothing without the rest of you.
Thank you. And I think that's, yes. So, and I'm going to come back to that point. I think that's a really good point. I'm going to come back to that point towards the end too. Now, Jess might like to speak a little bit more about this, but on the New South Wales Committee, we've considered and thought about and planned about the challenges that we face, about our strengths, about how we are going to grow the organisation and develop and become more effective advocates. So, the New South Wales Committee is developing particular strategic priorities, which will be published and distributed to you later on, I think towards the end of the year? Yes? Okay. And each particular project is being led by one member of the committee or a number of members of the committee. And as I said, we're all collaborating anyway through Zoom and exchanging ideas at the moment. And I'll develop that a little bit more. So, strategic priority 1, increase campaign momentum to educate the public on the importance of the ABC and demand secure, reliable, non-partisan funding for our public broadcaster, the foundation of our democracy. And Tess is leading that priority and developing that. My responsibility is number 2, and I am currently trying to increase membership numbers and diversity to stimulate creativity, innovation, and the development of new ideas. And I'll talk about some strategies I've got for that shortly. Number 3, develop a broader communication strategy. Now this comes back to utilising the technology. We're meeting on Zoom as well as in person. We're going to look at different forms of resources, technology we can use to create libraries of resources and communicate those more effectively and attract a support base that way. And Sue Noski from the Blue Mountains, the convener of the Blue Mountains, is developing that one. Number 4, increase administrative support to branches to strengthen and sustain our local activism. And I think this is particularly relevant to those new branches that are just trying to establish themselves. Number 5, increase our strategic political strategy to broaden our executive support base and secure connections with people with power. Now, it's understandable that Cassandra, who's our national president, would develop that because she's really very heavily involved in making representations to the federal parliament. And of course, her predecessor was Senator Margaret Reynolds, who really knew the inside of Parliament and how it operated and had established contacts. So I'm sure she's been a tremendous help to Cassandra in developing those contacts, along with the members of the alumni. Sorry, Tess, do you want to talk more about those priorities or add anything to that?
Or only to say
Well,
that
come up to the front. Well, welcome, Tess.
I've just come from the dentist. Half of my face is still midway through a crown. This was developed collaboratively, these priorities. So we conducted a survey towards the end of last year, and all of that data was analysed. So it's not me as a strategist and an academic developing these priorities. These are our priorities. We then had a planning day in February, and we workshopped, and Ross was there, many of you were there, Dana was there, just workshopping each of these areas that were identified in the survey, testing them out, looking how we can structure the initiatives to deliver on these priorities. And so, as you can see from the previous slide, that's the result of a lot of collaboration. It's not hierarchical. We are a community. And in order to develop this strategic plan, which obviously I'm leading as a strategist, it will reflect hopefully the concerns of all the branch members where all the work is done. We know, Corinne, and your lifetime work. This is where all the work is done. And these strategic priorities, I think they've just been circulated by Susan again. They are still in draft form, but we would love input. We would love you to engage with the document. Once we finalise it, probably, we've got to get through the winter dinner first, and then start teaching second semester. I'm still teaching at Macquarie. We will then finalise it by the end of the year. But this will be your document. It's not hierarchical. And I want to thank, of course, our project leads. And Ross is doing an amazing job, and so is Bruce. So as president, my ambition is, and the theme that we've embraced this year under my presidency is working collectively, harnessing that collective support that we've got across our branches and working as one. Because New South Wales has got some very active branches and some not so active branches that need help. And thank you, Janine, she's providing help to a branch right at this very moment. But if we can work together, collectively, as one, can you imagine what we can achieve? So thank you, and thank you, Ross.
Thank you, and I hope the pain is subsides. I've been through that. It's quite awkward.
Yes.
And Janine, by all means, if you want to talk about what you're doing in relation to that branch, please feel free, because that will help, I think. Okay, so that's my particular priority, and we've organised events on the Central Coast, and we've tried to get in touch with other community members. For instance, in 2017, my secretary and the events coordinator did a wonderful job in attracting Michael Carrington. And Michael, I'm not sure whether he still is or not, he might have moved on from that role, but he was in charge of ABC for Children, or the children's section of the ABC. And at that stage, Bluey was just a proposal. It was just in the pipeline. It was just about to be released, and he came and he spoke about this wonderful idea that he had, or not that he had, that they were developing, that they were just about to release, and of course it's been a phenomenal success. And as part of that, we tried to get childhood educators involved, and we found we had a few representatives, but it didn't really gain as much momentum as we wanted with reaching out to other community organisations. So that's really what I'm trying to do and focus on with this particular proposal. How can we interact and collaborate with other community groups, with other voluntary organisations, and gain perhaps more momentum and develop it more than we had in the past? And so, as part of that proposal, I sent out a survey, and I surveyed 20 organisations on the Central Coast, ones that I'd been involved with or had some contact with. And the thing about surveys is you don't want to make them too detailed because people will be put off. So I just had 5 questions. There was one business organisation, the Evoca Cinema, that I sent the survey to. I must say the response rate was pretty disappointed, and there's a voluntary organisation that I'm involved with, and the person in charge keeps saying to me when I speak to him, "Oh yes, that survey, now I'm going to send that to you." We're now in July. You might get to it. But I only had a response rate of 30%. Nevertheless, from those responses, we're trying to gain some ideas about how to develop things and how to grow our branch and how to become more of a force, I suppose, or a presence within our community. So, has your organisation used ABC resources, e.g. local radio? They all said yes. If the answer is yes, can you explain how the group used the resources of the ABC? And the answers include publicity or promotions for activities, for projects on ABC Local, contributing to programs on ABC Local Radio, interviews with local presenters. What types of assistance would you like the ABC to provide? And really, they all said, look, we want them to promote our organisation. We want publicity from the ABC. We want the ABC to broadcast what we do and how it helps the community. So, for instance, we've got a lot of community garden groups, and I'll talk about one of those in particular in a minute. And, you know, they'd love to have visits from Gardening Australia. Things like that. So, would you be interested in speaking to ABC Friends members about the type of work your organisation performs? And 5 out of 6 survey respondents answered in the affirmative. I think one just forgot to include their answer, so I'm going to assume that they answered in the affirmative as well. Additional comment. A great local service that I think could reach out to our multicultural community. So there's an opportunity there because one of the groups that responded is a multicultural interagency. So I'm hoping to get them involved in our next event. Just keep up the good work of defending our public broadcaster with some of the comments. So that then gives us, we thought, an opportunity. So we have on the Central Coast committee meetings, and then we have social meetings, and we alternate those on alternate months. So on our last social meeting, instead of meeting at the pub where we normally meet and having a chat and having a meal afterwards, we went out to a community garden. Oh, sorry. So these are the recommendations that I've made from the survey results. Contact community groups from a collaborative event. For a collaborative event, I'm going to talk about one of those in particular in a minute. Try to involve local ABC services to publicise the event and promote community organisations. Arrange for ABC Local to participate in and attend functions as well. Request that ABC Friends members visit the community organisations to find out more about what they're doing. use these collaborations to promote ourselves and our work. At events with other organisations make use of technology to promote the work that ABC services provide. Links on the screen. We had Jonathan Holmes come last year in April, and I was able to screen the Classic Choir 2022. Anyone here involved in the Classic Choir? Please get involved. It's a wonderful thing. And don't think you have to sing, because I can assure you I can't. I must have produced about 10 videos and finally got to one that I thought was reasonably satisfactory and submitted that, and I put in a comment for what you're about to hear. I'm truly sorry, but they included it anyway. So don't let that deter you if you're a beginner. Use of social media, developing and distributing branch newsletters, again through social media to promote our branch. Utilise the ABC National website. So with the community garden, I've said, look, we've just put in a report, it's now on the website, here's the link, you can have a look at it, here's a photo. So that's promoting that organisation as well through our organisation. We're also going to put Diana here has submitted an article in Update, or will, and so that will go in Update, and I'll send that link on to the community garden, and they can see their work promoted within our magazine. Attend community events such as markets or festivals to promote the ABC and ABC Friends. Okay, so let's have a look at the community garden visit. So here we are. Now we've got a huge, sounds like a fishing store, huge. We've got a considerable network of community gardens. I'm helping a committee try and develop one within my local area of Terrigal at the moment. And this was one garden that I've been involved with at East Gosford. That was organised by the Rotary Club there. And that used to be a park. Now, where's John? So John's just been to the Hornsby Council, and the Hornsby Council wanted to utilise a public park as for industrial use. Is that right?
Rezone it for industrial, light industrial.
Here's another suggestion you could put to them: community garden, because this was a public park, memorial park, and the Rotary organisation lobbied, negotiated with council. It's probably going to take us a year to get the one established at Terrigal. I'm not sure how long it took them, and they produced this marvellous garden for the public with raised garden beds and ground beds, wicking beds. They've got a shed with resources in it. They've got the water connected. They've got composting bins, worm farms, all those sorts of wonderful things that you can do. And some people don't do much gardening, they just love to go there and socialise. They have a chat at about 11 o'clock, they all stop and have a cup of tea, and people bring in cakes and bickies. It's a wonderful thing. So, because that's just up the road from where we met, we decided last Saturday to visit the East Gosford Community Garden, and this was an opportunity to interact that took the place of our usual social visits. So our two organisations were able to explain to one another what we do, what we're about, and talk about our different objectives, our different plans, the challenges that we've faced, and outline future proposals that we might be able to collaborate in. Now, I think one thing that might help is that I had contact with one of the organisers at the garden, other organisers, but I've been involved in the garden, so I had prior contact. I think that helped. One of the organisers is a member of the ABC Friends, so that's obviously going to help. So that might assist us to interact more in the future and broaden our appeal and our presence within the community. So I think it helps if you do a little bit of groundwork beforehand, and if you've got some contacts established already, and then you reach out to the organisation and say, look, we can come along and we can visit. We'd love you to talk about what you do. We'd like to talk about what we do. and we left membership brochures, and a lot of people picked up the membership brochures and took them away with them. So let's hope that will lead on to bigger things. And of course, everyone wants Costa Georgiadis, but he's too big a celebrity now. But we might be able to get someone who's been involved in Gardening Australia through working with the alumni and get them along to the garden perhaps and do an event there. Who knows? So there's an opportunity that you can build upon. Okay? And it didn't cost us anything. There was no charge involved. We just went and had a visit, spoke to one another, interacted, had a cup of tea, had some bickies, had a lovely time in the garden, and we've got some very, very positive feedback both from the gardeners and our own organisation. Now, here's our second proposal for community engagement. Through the Community Gardening Project at Terrigal, that's been auspiced or supported by a community services organisation at Terrigal Greenpoint. And their work includes assisting single mums, childcare, but also people from culturally diverse backgrounds. So I'm hoping that we can utilise that to get some of our diverse communities on the Central Coast along to this particular event about ABC International, presented by Helen. We also have a very, very strong environmental group, Central Coast Environment Network. I've been involved with them, I still am. I'm hoping to get them along because, of course, one issue that is of particular concern to our Pacific neighbours, the South Pacific, is climate change. And in the past I think they've really felt that Australia's overlooked them, hasn't given them the attention and the support that they feel they need about that issue, and rather taken them for granted. And then of course we know that there's a power to the north who's perceived an opportunity and then tried to move in, and then all of a sudden there's a flurry of activity. So that's something you could tie very much into the environment, particularly climate change, along with attracting people from diverse backgrounds and saying, look, one of the things that ABC International does is it tries to develop local media and local journalists so that you've got a stronger voice. Okay? So there's an opportunity that I'm hoping we can again develop and build upon, and then increase our presence within the community and collaborate with other community groups, particularly community groups from diverse communities. Okay, now anybody, any questions so far, or points, or
It's
ideas?
amazing. It's amazing. The work that Ross is doing as part of this strategy, it's all about building connections, strengthening each other, supporting each other. Not all of us operating in our separate branches. It was very, very, just thinking of that word, that scientific word, working as one. And you're doing a great job.
Thank you. Well, we hope that all this bears fruit. And one of the challenges, and I'm sure you're facing the same challenges, the cost of organising events. The wonderful thing about the community garden is it didn't cost anything. We didn't have to hire the hall, the venue. We didn't have to, sell tickets. We didn't have to cater for it. People just brought things along. So that's something that a fledgling branch could do quite easily. You just go along to another organisation or invite them along to your venue and get them to speak. Okay. With the event at the community centre, we're able to get that at a reduced cost for the hire of the venue because it is a community centre. Then that presents another challenge because we've got to handle the catering ourselves. It's not a club where they'll do that for us. So we are hiring caterers at a lesser expense than it would be at the latest proposal I've got. So there are ways of getting around things, but that can be a challenge, and of course those costs are going up. Now, I spoke about the Zoom meetings we're having. So we've had representatives from Northern Tablelands, Blue Mountains, Central Coast, ACT. Janine couldn't make it last time, but I'm sure she'll be involved in the next one. And Riverina Murray, Drew Porter, couldn't make it last time, but I'm sure he wants to be involved and wants to hear about things. And we're meeting on Zoom to discuss those strategic priorities and the particular issues that our particular branches face, the ideas that we've got, the challenges that we're facing, the problems that how can we confront the problems, ideas for confronting those problems. And we've had some interesting talks about our roles and objectives as branches, finances, technology, attracting new members, all those sorts of things. And these are going to be incorporated into those final recommendations that Tess was referring to earlier. Okay? So hopefully ideas that you can use. And when we meet on those Zoom meetings, I would reiterate a point that Tess made, we are representatives for our branches. So I would imagine before we meet on those Zoom meetings, what we need to do is talk amongst our branch members and say, what do you need us to talk about? What sort of support do you think we need? Where are we headed? How are we going to get there? Are there better ways of doing it? Okay, so you're providing the input and the ideas, even if you're not actually sitting in. I'm sorry, I've got to write. I'll move on. And this is the final thank you. Now, we won't dwell too much on the section of George Eliot's quote that refers to unvisited tombs. That's a bit morbid. But in Middlemarch, at the end of the book, or the end of the novel, she writes, "The growing good of the world is partly dependent on unhistoric acts. And that things are not so ill with you and me as they might have been is half owing to the number who live faithfully a hidden life." So again, thank you for what you're doing to support the public broadcaster, because you're protecting a national treasure. And without it, we'd all be far worse off. And you're doing that voluntarily and giving up time that you could be spending with your friends and family and enjoying yourselves. So, congratulations.
Thank you.